everyone. Hello, we're glad you joined us. Hello? Hi. I didn't know I was going to be answered.
Katie, and it's Polly.
What?
Maria.
No, go ahead, Martha.
How are you?
They say hi to you.
Hi to you all. We'll talk afterward, okay? Hello, everyone. This is the St. Matthew ECC Church Bible Study Group that meets on Facebook and Zoom. And we also put the recordings on our website. Some of you have been here for previous studies, and you kind of know how it goes, but others may not have. So let me just briefly capsule our format and what we're doing and what will be helpful to you. On Facebook, there are 3 handouts for today.
Martha's muted. Martha's muted. Yeah, she needs to. So she needs to unmute herself.
I can't understand what you're saying.
Tammy can unmute her.
I'm trying, but it's not letting me unmute.
You're frozen, Tammy. You're frozen on my screen.
Am I frozen?
And could Mother Martha get the camera a little bit closer to her so we can see her?
Closer?
I can't unmute Martha.
I can text.
Okay. Better?
There we go. Hey. That's better.
Do I need to start over?
Yeah, Martha, start over. Could you please?
It's fine.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm going to start over. Sorry to bore those of you who are already here. This is the St. Matthew ECC Church Bible Study. We have a group on Facebook, and we also Zoom the sessions, and we record them because there are people in other time zones who can't meet in this time frame. And for those of you who've been through the studies before, you kind of know the procedures that we're following. The session is only a half hour each Monday at 7 o'clock. And this particular study that we're doing will only go for 7 sessions. So it's a quickie. Unlike the one we just finished, where we did 23rd Psalm, 1 line at a time, we're going to gallop through a lot of material with this one, give you the materials you need to do more on your own if you choose to, and give you some handouts that will be extra if you want. There'll be a handout for each session, and the handouts are roughly divided into material I put together with a meditation prayer section at the end. And then finally, I may add some material like from Wikipedia where I just copy it and I let you know that I've done that. And there will be other handouts too. Today you have the intro notes, which will follow today. And you have one for next week, session 2, which will be on the Psalms. And then there's a third thing that was sent to you called Bergant Wisdom. Bergant is a author of a good book if you want to go into the wisdom books in more depth. And I read it on my Kindle, which will allow you to copy excerpts into notes. So what you have in that file is my notes from the entire book. I recommend that you get it, and I have some other books I can recommend too. But we will proceed where the materials you get for each session are complete in themselves, and if you want to go deeper, you can. This is not going to be like a deeply technical type study. It's going to be geared more toward what can we learn about God, whom we call God, in both the Jewish and the Christian faiths, and how can we trace this idea through the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. But first, let me say a little bit about the concept, how I came into this. You'll notice that the cover of the book is one of these pictures that we call fractals. It's kind of what you get if there is chaos in a system, that it does organize itself. What seems to be random or chaotic, there are actually underlying patterns. There's an interconnectedness. There are feedback loops, repetitions, patterns, and self-organization in a system. And I remember thinking back when I first came into a sacramental tradition, at that time I was looking for something to make sense out of the world. We're all looking for finding meaning or making meaning. And this idea that there's chaos, which we experience as chaos, and yet there may be an organization under it all that we're not aware of. And so in the title, I allude to this: out of chaos, let our ordered lives confess the beauty of peace. We find order, we make order. Both are true. And Scripture deals with this idea that things are seemingly random. Good things happen to bad people, or it rains on the good and the bad, and the wicked get away with a lot. And so sometimes that just doesn't seem fair. And to a good extent, the wisdom books in Scripture give us some handle on those feelings and those ideas. How do we make sense of our world? How do we discover or make meaning in our world and in our lives? And that is what drew me to the wisdom books. In the Protestant Bible, you have Job, Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, which are considered wisdom books. But the first time I opened a Catholic Bible and discovered all these other books that were not in the Catholic Bible, I thought, man, I've been ripped off my entire life. This is ridiculous. All this beautiful stuff, and I have been ripped off for my entire life. So we'll talk a little bit about what's in the Protestant Bible, Catholic Bible, or Orthodox Bible, and also what is accepted in the Hebrew Bible, because it's important to understand how we got what we got, and then we'll move into individual selections of the wisdom books. And as I said, we'll be kind of galloping through. I'm going to give you some overall concepts, and then each time we'll focus on a particular example that we can use in our own meditation and prayer. So that's the plan for how this is going to go. So wisdom teaching is creation theology. And I didn't really fully appreciate that as much until Yeti and I began studying with a couple of rabbis at the American Jewish University a few months ago. But wisdom is creation theology, and they dig deep into creation. And I feel like we have missed a lot by not doing that. I think that our whole movement about the world and taking care of the world and the environment could benefit from the study of creation theology. We also know that there are other cultures that have paid much more attention to it than we have. For example, the Native Americans. It was not lost on them, but it was lost on us. And we need to reinvest in those ideas and bring them into our current living and understanding. So, wisdom theology we gain from several places. We can meditate on the wonders of creation, and it's all there for us, the organization of it, the seeming randomness at times, but yet there is an overall organization. We obtain it from studying Scripture. We obtain it from prayer. We learn through our own life experiences. We can observe other people and what they go through. We can investigate scientifically in the world. And we learn that certain principles simply work, both scientifically and spiritually. There are what we could call empirical findings, truth that we find in both of these areas. And we find it through God's holy presence. And holy presence is a term that both Jews and Christians will be comfortable with. In your handout, I've given you some material on the Shekinah, the presence of God as it's traced through the Bible. Our Bishop Peter wrote a short piece some years ago, and I've attached it in the handouts. So let me back up a little and talk just a little bit about the structure of the Hebrew Bible and then the structure of the New Testament and how did we derive these books? Why these books and not others? Because we know that there have been many other books that have subsequently been discovered. So let's talk just a little bit about that. The Pentateuch, or what is called the Torah, is Genesis plus 4 books that make up the law: Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And these books came under the authority of the Hebrew priesthood. And then there are the prophets, such as Isaiah or Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and there are 12 so-called minor prophets also. And those come under the authority of the prophets in the Hebrew system. And the writings include the Psalms and books of wisdom literature, plus books such as Ruth, Esther, Lamentations, and those came under the authority of the sages. And those 3 collections make up the Hebrew Bible, sometimes called the Tanakh, T-N-K. It's an acronym based on the Hebrew words for those 3 sections of the book. And there was a process by which these books came into what we call the Jewish canon, what were the books they accepted into their tradition. And there are some writings that were accepted but considered secondary, but still acceptable, perhaps not binding, but used for study. So let's look at what was the accepted canon. Not all of the wisdom books we're going to discuss are accepted by every group, but all Christians and Jews accept Psalms, Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes. You'll find those in either the Hebrew or any Christian Bible. But if you were raised Catholic, you find some additional books. You find Baruch, Wisdom, Sirach. Sirach is also called Ecclesiasticus, not to be confused with Ecclesiastes. Those were not part of the first tier of Hebrew canon, but they're still studied. And the Jewish canon did not, for example, accept Sirach, because at the time the canon was forming, the only manuscript for Sirach was in Greek. So that disqualified it. It had to be in Hebrew. But in our last century, in modern times, we have discovered Hebrew versions for about 2/3 of the book. But at any rate, in our study with the rabbis, we're learning that there are other reasons that they have for this being considered a second tier book. And then some of you were familiar with Bart Ehrman, who is a well-known New Testament scholar, and he's done some writings in Hebrew Bible or Old Testament too. He says that in the Old Testament there were 3 basic criteria for whether the rabbis accepted books into their canon. Only books in Hebrew, and the age of the book. It had to have venerable authority. If it was written after the 4th century BCE, it probably would not be included, but there were some that were written later but mistakenly thought to have been written earlier, such as Daniel. But in general, their books are 400 BCE or earlier. And then finally was usage. Were the books used in a wide range of Jewish communities? Did they have that authoritative tradition? And those were the criteria they used to decide whether books would go into the canon. And then similarly, in the Christian tradition, the early church fathers determined what books would be in the New Testament. And their criteria are very similar to those used by the rabbis. You'll find more details of this in your handout. But antiquity, the book had to go back to early Christian development in order to be included. Apostolicity, that's hard to pronounce, but the books had to be written or purported to have been written by the apostles, including disciples of Jesus or other followers in the first generation. And some books were anonymous, but they were still attributed to the apostles or their generation. And then the next criterion was Catholicity, which means that, like the Jews, they had to have been pretty well accepted throughout the church, not just local favorites. And Orthodoxy, the book had to be considered doctrinally orthodox orthodox means right teachings, but we should know that in the first 200 to 300 years, doctrine and dogma were still very much in a flux, and there were several competing understandings. So in our case, the wisdom books are in the Jewish canon or in a second tier of books that are accepted by either Christians or Jews for study. And then we will find later in this session of the sequence of classes that wisdom very much shows up in the New Testament, but not as separate writings. It's been digested and has influenced and is embedded very much in our Christian tradition. So we'll try to get there so you'll see how we got from there to here for those of you who are in the Christian tradition. So we need to know from a Jewish perspective, there are other parts of the Hebrew Bible that are considered wisdom stories, wisdom literature. For example, the book of Genesis. Adam and Eve is a wisdom story. And the sin of Adam and Eve in the Jewish concept is not the desire for knowledge or wisdom, but in failing to follow the ordering that God gave for seeking it. Seeking your own wisdom leads to death. And I think that's a very useful perspective. And the story of Noah and the beginning of what we term the first covenant, what Jews call the covenant, that is considered to have very strong wisdom influence in it. The rainbow of promise and the earth renewed after the flood is the promise of the covenant. And so that we won't have a chance to go into, but we're learning about that in our Jewish classes. They're taking us through these books, and it's very interesting to study it from that perspective. Now, there's another term that is used by both Jews and Christians called the Shekinah, divine presence. And we're going to rely on this concept a lot. In the Hebrew, it was Shekinah, and is the English translation of a Hebrew word that means dwelling or settling. And it denotes the dwelling or settling of the divine presence of God. There's another term called Hakmah, which is the biblical Hebrew for wisdom. And it occurs in the English Bible, whichever versions you're using, and it shows up in the Hebrew Bible 259 times, wisdom. It could be called Sophia in the Greek, or in the Latin, sapientia. So Hakmah, or wisdom, permeates the entire Hebrew Bible. So this is important to know, very important to understand that we're talking about wisdom, we're talking about Shekinah, the divine presence of God, and we are going to see how these things turn up through the Hebrew Bible and into the New Testament. And I think that you will find this powerful. It was powerful for me when I first began to study it. And each time I go back, there's more and more, and it goes on. So I'm going to stop there for tonight, but if you can get the handout, look over more details in the intro handout, and look at the second handout, which is covering Psalms, that we'll do in more depth with a couple of examples next week. This was just an overview so you can see where these books and concepts came from. And so I want to give our little commercial here, and then I will want to close with a prayer and a blessing from Jewish tradition that Yeti and I have added to our nightly prayers in the last few months. I hope you love it as much as we do. We've come to really love this and need to use it every day now. But for the little infomercial, we are St. Matthew Ecumenical Catholic Church, and you can go to our website, and there's a donate button. This Yeti is not paid for this, but we have accounts for Zoom and other things that have to keep going at the church. There are salaried employees that have got to be paid. We have begun our live masses again, and more people are coming. We're still observing all the protections for COVID, and we're still doing all of our services on Zoom or Facebook, because we've come to realize that there are a lot of you out there who maybe can't come to St. Matthew, and that we're reaching a lot of people. So if you are able, whether you're a part of St. Matt's or you just like what we're doing, that we're trying to serve St. Matt's and to serve anybody out there who has a desire to learn, to study, and to pray, we welcome you. We welcome everyone. So thank you for coming tonight. And now I'm going to give you the blessing and prayer. And I did print it in the first handout if it's one that you would like to use. I found it so powerful. So here's how it goes. We do it with the hand motions that go with it, that make it feel so real to us. In the name of Adonai, the God of Israel, may the angel Michael be at our right, and the angel Gabriel at our left, and in front of us, the angel Uriel, and behind us, the angel Raphael, and above our heads, the Shekinah, divine presence. Amen. Love you guys. Look forward to seeing you again next week. Stay tuned. We love you. Bye-bye.